Frozen bear pleads to enter a man's home. What happens next will shock you. The icy winds howled like restless spirits, rattling the windows of a small, secluded cabin nestled in the middle of an endless white landscape. The snowstorm outside was merciless, blanketing the world in layers of freezing isolation. Inside the cabin, a man named Ethan sat by a flickering fireplace, sipping on a cup of steaming coffee. The warmth of the flames fought to chase away the chill that seeped through the walls. Ethan had grown used to solitude in this remote wilderness, far from the chaos of human civilization. He had come here seeking peace after the losses that had shattered his life, but tonight, even the fire's comforting crackle couldn't calm the strange unease creeping into his chest. Suddenly, a sound pierced through the storm's relentless roar, a faint scratching noise at the door. Ethan froze, his heart skipping a beat. It was unlikely for anyone to be out in such brutal weather, but the sound persisted, desperate and rhythmic. Who or what could be out there? Cautiously, Ethan rose and approached the door. The scratching grew louder, almost frantic now. Peeking through the frosted window, his breath caught. Outside, huddled against the storm, was a massive bear. Its fur was caked with snow, its body trembling as if the cold was sapping the life from it. Ethan's first instinct was fear. Every fiber of his being told him to stay away. But something about the bear's behavior stopped him. It wasn't acting aggressively. Instead, it seemed pleading. Its wide, sorrowful eyes locked onto his as it let out a low, mournful groan. The sound was unlike anything he'd heard before, raw and filled with pain, as if it was begging for help. Ethan stood paralyzed, torn between his instincts and the unshakable feeling that this bear wasn't here to harm him. Why would a wild animal act this way? What could it possibly want? Against every ounce of logic, Ethan felt his hand reach for the door handle. Ethan hadn't always lived this way, cut off from the world, surrounded only by the silence of the wilderness. Once, he had been a part of a bustling city, surrounded by friends and a family he cherished. But life has a way of unraveling even the strongest bonds. A devastating accident had taken away everything he held dear, leaving him hollow and lost. Unable to face the memories that haunted him, Ethan packed up his life and disappeared into the woods, hoping to find solace in solitude. The cabin had become his sanctuary. Days passed in quiet monotony, broken only by the occasional sighting of wildlife or the rhythm of nature's seasons. Over time, Ethan had grown accustomed to the stillness. He trusted no one, kept no connections, and built walls around his heart to shield it from further pain. To him, the wilderness was safe, a place where he couldn't be hurt again. But as he stared at the trembling bear outside his door, a strange emotion stirred within him. The sight of the creature, vulnerable and desperate, chipped away at the walls he had so carefully constructed. Ethan's hand hovered over the door handle, hesitation gripping him like a vice. Every rational thought screamed at him to step away. A bear was still a wild animal, unpredictable and dangerous. What if this was a trap, some instinctive behavior meant to lure him out? What if opening that door put his own life at risk? He took a step back, shaking his head. "This is crazy," he muttered under his breath. "It's not my problem." He turned away from the door, trying to convince himself to ignore the cries. But the sound, the soft scratching and the low, sorrowful groans, echoed in his ears, gnawing at his resolve. Ethan closed his eyes, memories flooding back. He thought about the times when he had needed someone, anyone, and no one had come. That pain, that helplessness, was something he wouldn't wish on anyone, not even a bear. With a deep breath, he turned back toward the door, his heart pounding in his chest. Against his better judgment, Ethan slowly unlocked it and opened it just a crack. The icy wind surged in, stinging his face, but it was nothing compared to the sight before him. The bear was closer now, its massive form slumped in exhaustion. It looked up at him with eyes that seemed to hold more emotion than any animal should be capable of. And then it did something Ethan could never have anticipated. It nudged the door gently, as if asking permission to come inside. Ethan's grip on the door tightened. Was he really about to let a bear into his home? The thought was insane, Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random encounter. There was something deeper at play, something he couldn't explain but knew he couldn't ignore. As Ethan opened the door wider, the bear remained still, almost as if it understood the man's hesitation. It made no move to charge or intimidate. Instead, it lowered its head submissively and let out a soft, guttural sound. A far cry from the fierce roars Ethan had always associated with such a creature. Its movements were deliberate yet cautious, as if it was aware of the fragility of the moment. Slowly, the bear stepped forward, but not in a threatening way. It stopped just at the threshold, its massive paws leaving deep impressions in the snow. The storm raged on behind it, but the creature seemed intent on staying where it could be seen, as if it was asking for permission to cross the invisible boundary between wildness and trust. Ethan couldn't believe what he was seeing. The bear's fur was matted with ice, and its breathing was labored, each puff of air visible in the freezing night. Its eyes, however, held something Ethan didn't expect: intelligence, emotion, and an unmistakable plea. The bear wasn't just seeking shelter, it was trying to communicate. Ethan hesitated, his thoughts racing. Was this bear sick, injured, or worse, was it desperate enough to turn on him? But before he could spiral further into fear, the bear did something extraordinary. It turned its head slightly, as if motioning toward the woods, and let out a low, mournful sound. The sound sent a chill through Ethan, one that had nothing to do with the cold. It wasn't a growl or a roar but a deep, sorrowful moan that seemed to echo with desperation. The bear's body language shifted, almost as if it was urging Ethan to follow it. Ethan's eyes darted to the storm outside, and then back to the bear. Was it possible the creature wanted him to leave the safety of his cabin? He shook his head, the idea absurd. But the bear, determined and persistent, repeated the motion. It stepped back into the snow, glancing over its shoulder, and then looked at Ethan again. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the tug of something unexplainable, a primal connection, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The bear wasn't just seeking help, it was guiding him. But to what? Against every instinct, Ethan grabbed his coat and flashlight, stepping out into the frigid night. The bear's eyes gleamed in the darkness as it turned and began to move through the snow, limping slightly as if injured. Ethan followed, each step into the storm feeling like he was stepping into the unknown. What could possibly be so urgent that a wild animal would risk its own life to bring a human into the wilderness? Ethan didn't know the answer, but something told him he was about to find out. Ethan's boots crunched against the thick snow as he stepped further into the blizzard, each step feeling heavier than the last. The wind howled in his ears, and the world around him was reduced to swirling white chaos. His mind screamed at him to turn back, to return to the safety of his cabin where warmth and shelter awaited. But the bear's eyes, those pleading eyes, kept him moving forward. He had no idea what he was walking into, but there was a strange sense of trust growing within him, one that defied all logic. This wasn't just about a bear looking for shelter. Something much deeper was happening, something more than just survival. The storm whipped at his face, and his fingers tingled with cold. But Ethan pressed on, barely able to see more than a few feet ahead of him. The bear was ahead of him, moving with surprising agility despite the snowstorm. Ethan had no choice but to keep up, following its large, powerful form through the blinding white world. Every minute in the snow felt like a gamble. With every gust of wind, Ethan questioned whether he was making the right decision. Was he being foolish? Was this bear leading him into danger? But he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a random encounter. It was a call, a chance to do something bigger than himself. As the journey dragged on, Ethan could feel his strength waning. The cold was unbearable, seeping into his bones despite the layers of clothing. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and visibility had become almost non-existent. The path ahead was obscured by snowdrifts, and each step felt like an eternity. But Ethan wasn't about to give up. The bear had led him this far, and he owed it something. He looked ahead and saw the bear's large silhouette through the storm. The creature was moving slowly, its fur weighed down with snow and ice. But there was a purpose in its every step, a quiet determination that Ethan couldn't ignore. This bear was fighting through the storm, just as Ethan was. They were in this together. Suddenly, the bear stopped, its ears twitching as it turned its head toward the forest. Ethan's heart raced as he followed its gaze, only to see something that made his blood run cold. Through the storm, there was a faint glow, a flicker of light in the distance, barely visible but unmistakable. With renewed urgency, the bear began moving toward it, and Ethan followed, every step more difficult than the last. The storm seemed to rage even harder now, almost as if it were trying to push them back. Yet, the bear moved on with fierce determination, its focus unwavering as if it knew exactly where it was headed. The wind howled louder, and the snow stung Ethan's face like needles, but the bear pressed on. Each time it stumbled or faltered, it regained its footing, eyes locked on the distant glow. Ethan could see the exhaustion in the bear's movements, but there was no stopping it. The bear's resolve was unwavering, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something inside him stir. A spark of hope, something he had almost forgotten. He realized the bear wasn't just surviving the storm. It was fighting to get somewhere, to reach something that mattered. And for some unknown reason, it had chosen Ethan to follow. Every step felt like a battle, but the bear's persistence gave him strength. He couldn't let it down now. Ethan pushed forward, the glow in the distance growing brighter with each step. The storm roared, but it seemed quieter now, less overwhelming. The path, though treacherous, felt like the right one, and Ethan's heart pounded with anticipation. What lay ahead? And why was the bear leading him there? As they approached the glow, the intensity of the storm seemed to ease just enough for Ethan to make out the shape of something. A small structure, barely visible through the snow. The bear had brought him here for a reason, and he was about to find out exactly why. As the bear moved closer to the structure, Ethan's pulse quickened. The storm seemed to retreat just slightly, as if nature itself were holding its breath. The dim light from the glowing source became clearer, revealing a small, makeshift shelter, partly obscured by the dense trees, as though it had been hidden away on purpose. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. What was this place? The last thing he expected to find in the middle of the wilderness was a structure like this, especially after the ferocity of the storm. The bear's steps slowed as it reached the entrance, and with one final glance at Ethan, it stopped and turned to face the small shelter. The door was cracked open, and as Ethan approached, he could feel a warmth that was almost magical in contrast to the cold that surrounded them. A flicker of light inside caught his attention. A fire, burning softly in the corner of the room. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the shelter feel alive. A beacon of hope amidst the relentless storm. Ethan hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to expect. His mind raced with questions. Who had built this? And why had the bear led him here? But the answer came not in words, but in action. The bear let out a low, soft grunt, nudging the door open wider, before looking back at Ethan once more. The invitation was clear. Step inside. Without another word, Ethan stepped over the threshold, and what he saw next was enough to freeze him in place. Inside the shelter, the faint glow was not just from the fire, but from something far more heart-wrenching. A small bear cub, no older than a few months, huddled near the warmth of the fire. The cub's fur was soaked, and its small body trembled from the cold. The moment it saw the bear standing at the door, its eyes widened in recognition, and it let out a weak but hopeful cry. The adult bear, Ethan now realized, wasn't just seeking shelter. It was a mother, desperately trying to get back to her cub after being separated by the brutal storm. As the mother bear approached, her cub instinctively crawled toward her, despite its weakened state. The reunion was quiet, powerful, and full of raw emotion. The little one nuzzled against its mother, finding comfort and warmth in her presence. Ethan's chest tightened as he watched the tender moment unfold before him. The bond between the two was undeniable, a love so fierce and pure that it made his heart ache. He hadn't expected this. What had seemed like an encounter with a dangerous animal had turned into something much more profound. An act of love, of a mother's desperate search for her child. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a deep, unspoken connection. The bear's actions, leading him through the storm, guiding him toward this shelter, hadn't been random. The bear had needed help, not just to survive, but to reunite with the one thing that mattered most, her cub. Ethan watched in silence, his own heart swelling with emotion as the two bears shared their warmth, their bond, and their resilience. In that moment, Ethan understood that sometimes the most unexpected moments hold the most powerful lessons. The love of a mother, the determination to protect, and the unspoken connection between beings, human or animal, was something that transcended all barriers. Ethan stood there, a mere witness to the unfolding miracle, his eyes locked on the mother bear and her cub. The storm still raged outside, but inside the shelter, a warmth filled the air that seemed to defy the elements. The harsh winds and the blinding snow were no longer as terrifying as they had been before. In that small, simple shelter, Ethan felt a sense of calm, a sense of peace. But as much as he wanted to stand in awe of the tender reunion, there was something within him that needed to be faced. His fear. Fear that had plagued him for years. Fear of the unknown. Fear of trusting another being, especially one so wild, so untamed. The instinct to stay safe, to retreat, had always been his go-to response. But tonight, standing in this shelter, he realized something profound. His fear had kept him isolated for too long. He had chosen the life of solitude, of self-preservation, but it had also meant shutting himself off from the world around him. From the connections that could heal, from the bonds that could save him. Watching the mother bear with her cub, seeing the lengths she went to, despite the storm, despite the danger, it struck him deeply. She wasn't running from fear. She was fighting through it. And in that moment, Ethan knew he had to do the same. He had to overcome his own fears, not just for the sake of his own survival, but for something bigger. Something that he now realized was more important than all the solitude he'd clung to for so long. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped closer to the bears. His heart pounded in his chest as the adult bear lifted its head, its eyes narrowing for just a moment. But instead of charging, the bear simply watched him, as though assessing his intentions. Ethan met her gaze, steady and calm. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to let fear control him anymore. The bear blinked, as if accepting this unspoken challenge, and then, to his surprise, lowered her head once again, nudging her cub gently closer to Ethan. The silent message was clear. She trusted him. And in that moment, Ethan felt something change inside himself. A shift, a release of the chains that had held him captive for so long. Ethan bent down slowly, his heart still racing, and extended his hand toward the cub. The bear mother watched him with careful eyes, but the cub, perhaps sensing the sincerity in Ethan's gesture, inched closer to him. The small creature sniffed his hand tentatively, its cold little nose brushing against his glove. There was a brief moment of hesitation, but then the cub made the decision to trust. The touch was electric. A simple connection, a quiet understanding. Ethan's heart swelled as the cub settled beside him, no longer afraid. And the mother bear, seeing this newfound trust, let out a soft grunt of approval, as if acknowledging that this was the beginning of something powerful. For the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't feel alone. The bears, despite their wildness, had brought him into their world, one of vulnerability, of love, and of mutual respect. They had trusted him with their most precious bond, and he, in turn, had opened his heart to them. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside that shelter, Ethan felt safe. Not just physically, but emotionally. He had overcome his fear, and in doing so, he had forged an unexpected bond. A bond that went beyond the walls of the cabin, beyond the wilderness. It was a bond of trust, of understanding, and most of all, of connection. Ethan sat quietly, feeling the weight of the moment. The storm might have been fierce, but in the company of the mother bear and her cub, he understood something far deeper. That sometimes, the greatest risks lead to the most beautiful rewards. As dawn broke, the storm finally began to subside. The fierce winds and biting cold gradually gave way to a quiet stillness, as though nature itself was paying tribute to the bond that had formed within the shelter. The fire had burned low, casting soft shadows across the walls, and the warmth that had once filled the space began to fade. It was time to leave. Ethan stood, his legs stiff from sitting for so long, but his heart was light. The mother bear and her cub had curled up together, resting peacefully after their long, harrowing journey through the storm. The emotional weight of the night had left Ethan feeling deeply changed. He had come seeking nothing more than refuge from the storm, but what he had found was something far more profound. A lesson in resilience, in love, and in the importance of connection. The mother bear stirred as Ethan gathered his things. Her eyes met his once more, and in that gaze, there was a sense of understanding, a wordless exchange that spoke volumes. There was no need for words, no grand gestures. The connection between them had been made not in what was said, but in what had been shared. The trust, the acceptance. It was all unspoken, yet deeply felt. As Ethan stepped toward the door, the cub raised its head, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and gratitude. The mother bear gave a low, rumbling sound, and the cub hesitantly followed her, snuggling up once more to her side. The moment felt like a quiet farewell, not a goodbye, but a promise. A promise that, despite the harsh world outside, there was always a way back to warmth, to safety, and to love. Ethan gave one last look back at the bears, his chest tight with emotion. "Take care," he whispered, as if the words could bridge the gap between two worlds. Then he stepped outside, closing the door gently behind him, and walked into the calm after the storm. The morning light was soft, casting golden hues across the snow-covered ground. The storm had passed, and the world felt quieter, more peaceful. Ethan stood for a moment, letting the serenity wash over him. The wilderness that had once felt isolating, cold, and unwelcoming now seemed full of life, vibrant, raw, and full of possibility. As he made his way back to his cabin, Ethan's thoughts lingered on the night he had shared with the bears. The simple act of offering help, of trusting the unknown, had changed him in ways he couldn't fully understand yet. For years, he had lived in isolation, convinced that it was the safest way to exist. But now, he knew that there was a much deeper strength in the connections we form, with others, with the world around us, and with the creatures that share this planet. The encounter with the bear and her cub had shown him that no matter how wild or unpredictable life may be, there is always room for compassion, for kindness, and for a bond that transcends fear. It wasn't just about survival. It was about living, truly living, with an open heart and a willingness to reach out, even when the world seems distant and cold. Ethan reached his cabin and paused at the door. He turned back, glancing over the snowy expanse behind him, knowing that what he had just experienced would stay with him forever. He had faced his fears. He had overcome his isolation. And in the process, he had learned to trust again. The wilderness no longer felt like a place to escape from, but a place to embrace. As he stepped inside, he knew his life would never be the same. The bear's plea, the cub's quiet cry for help, had changed his path. And as the door closed behind him, Ethan felt a sense of peace he had never known before. This life-changing encounter with the wild had opened his eyes to the beauty of connection, the importance of trust, and the incredible strength of love. As we wrap up this incredible journey, we're left with an important question. How often do we choose to stay in our comfort zones, fearing the unknown, when the greatest rewards lie just beyond our fears? Ethan's story with the bear and her cub is a powerful reminder that sometimes, the most life-changing experiences come when we allow ourselves to connect with the world around us. Whether it's reaching out to someone else or embracing something as wild and untamed as nature itself. This tale isn't just about a man and a bear. It's about the courage to trust, to step into the unknown, and to overcome the emotional walls we've built around ourselves. It's a story of redemption, healing, and the transformative power of compassion. What fears are you holding on to? And what could be waiting for you on the other side if you dared to break free? Ethan learned that the greatest journeys often start with a simple step, one that involves opening your heart and being willing to trust. What will your first step look like? We want to hear from you. Have you ever had a life-changing encounter that helped you overcome fear or opened your heart in ways you didn't expect? How did it change the way you see the world? Leave a comment below and share your story with us. Let's talk about how we can all embrace the wild, unpredictable moments in life and grow from them. And if you were inspired by Ethan's journey, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an uplifting story that could change your life. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most unexpected moments lead to the most profound transformations.